Oh, yes. This is the Hardcore Marketing Show. My name is Casey Cheshire, and I am your host for this epic journey. And today's show, sponsored by Cheshire Impact, on a mission to help you maximize your use of Pardot and Salesforce. CheshireImpact.com. Bam! Now, my guest today, hello. This is a first for the Hardcore Marketing Show. My guest today has already been a guest, and I'm going to introduce him. He was on a previous show talking about marketing ROI. He has a book on it that is timeless and full of goodies and information. We're going to talk about that as well. But he is the president and founder of the Lenskold Group. Jim Lenskold, welcome back, sir.
Hey there, Casey. It's really good to be back.
You made the cut.
I know, really. And the way I always describe it, I said the session we did together was so full of good content. But I said, but it was the funnest, best show I ever did because you keep it high energy, you keep it real.
Oh man, so this is either high or low from this.
That's right.
Hopefully we played the king last time, so we can play the ace today.
Oh yeah, leave some room.
Right.
Sounds good.
So yeah, I think that was like episode 3. I think we were saying.
Wow. Yeah.
And, back when I was little Casey and I didn't know what I was doing.
That's right. Nah, it's just getting better and better too. Really good episodes.
It totally is, and
yeah.
And what's funny is we were talking about beforehand, each month has been a different theme. And for everyone listening, you and I, we had started talking about marketing ROI back in the day. That was
That's right.
second month. And as we were talking about ROI and numbers, really the idea of measurement and testing was just naturally, it was all we could do to not talk about it.
I know, right?
So this is the month for
the
theme around that maturity model for marketing and for marketing automation.
That's right.
Where people go and they blast out emails. We want them to do things in certain order so that they're not wasting their cycles. And we've talked about getting to know our buyer. We've talked about marketing ROI and things like nurture campaigns and social and content. And now we're getting onto the idea, and maybe it doesn't have to be a last thing, but we're going to talk about what this is. But the idea of testing, marketing testing, how to wrap our heads around this. And I would just like to pass you Thor's hammer and see if you'd like to smash some myths again.
Exactly. Well, it's kind of interesting the way you just set that up, brought a thought to mind. So when you think about, all right, so we are out there as marketers doing our marketing.
Yep.
And let's say that we're one of those marketers that at least is tracking whatever we can track, right? There's always more and more and more you can do.
Totally.
So we're looking at our results and let's say 4 weeks, 6 weeks, a couple months in, and we're going, that's not performing the way I expected. Something's wrong. So what do? We go and change something. We wait some more weeks and hey, did it get better? Did it get worse?
Right.
What we're trying to establish with the concept of market testing is what if we could have learned that much more in those first 4 to 6 weeks? So what came to mind as you were setting things up was a while back I was writing a paper with a bunch of professors, and one of them, I'm pretty sure it was Dave Reebstein from Wharton, said when you are marketing without testing and measurement, you're basically doing a one-cell test, meaning it will work or not work. And what's interesting too, even if it's working, you don't know if it could have been working better. It's just you have one element. So what we're trying to establish today is that idea of comparison. So what if you put a little bit more effort in, you focus and you had some learning, but as time goes on, your ability to get better and better happens faster. And what we're going to get into is, how much can we learn and what can we get at that? So that's kind of, I think that's what we want to go into this session thinking, right?
In my head, the idea of just sometimes we just think of testing as that cutesy little subject line in the email.
Right.
And to your point, this is really interesting. Without testing, you're actually testing.
Right.
But you're not in control of it.
You're testing one thing and you're not even sure. And then, in fact, actually think about it that way. At the end of those 4 to 6 weeks, when something's not working, you have no idea why. So it could be, there's all these pieces of the marketing plan and the strategy and the tactics. So I think if we're going to bust a myth, it's the one you just set up there is I think most people believe that when we do market testing, which let's say, people are doing some form of it, that what we're trying to do is find an element of the marketing that's tactical, that's something that, well, we couldn't decide on a subject line or a landing page, so we did 2 of them and we tested it, which is actually excellent. I'm not going to complain about that.
Sure.
The myth we want to bust, though, is the methodology of market testing has way more power, and it's so underutilized today. So what I want people to walk away, to me, it is the most strategic measurement we have. So it's that ability to test and find big wins. Okay, so why wouldn't we make this our top priority if we could get big wins? So
right.
The beauty of a market test is we have a comparison of something where we believe could work, right? And we're comparing that against maybe business as usual. And that could be, we are testing a touch point that didn't exist, so now we have a measure. It could be something within the campaign, again, maybe a major difference in the campaign and not a minor one.
Right.
I'll put it out this way. There was a situation a couple years back where I was working with a really big company, and their biggest question was on the brand positioning statement. That basically the sentence or two that defines every marketing for this whole organization.
Wow.
And what happened was, it was an interesting one in that they were trying to say, if you spend more up front, it will cost you less in the long run. So it's that idea of total cost of ownership, right?
Yeah, I believe that. It makes sense.
But it's a tough message when you're trying to convey cost savings and you're trying to convince someone to pick up the most expensive item. That's a tough one. So it really becomes a 2-part message. And so the way we mapped out this test design was to test different concepts, but it was the 2 parts. So what we were basically trying to emulate was, there's a headline, and what we used there was banner ads. So in a sense, are people interested in this main headline? And then they click through. And then you had the backup. And so then you could have different landing pages. So which combination got people to kind of continue on past in a sense, we were saying, did they read the headline, the banner ad?
Right.
Did they like it enough and get interested? When they saw the landing page, did they continue on? And basically, by setting up that structure, it was not about the digital media campaign. It was about how people can interpret and get through that message. And so that's kind of went through. There was, the company did get a lot of learning out of it and made some progress. But it's this idea of what the potential is. So myth number 1, make this strategic, or dispel the myth is make this strategic and go for big wins.
Yeah, right. It's almost like we're hanging out in small land, right? We're just making small tests, and maybe they're not even testing anything. They're just 2 different things that.
Right.
And that's, probably that's what happened. People, they're not being deliberate. They're not thinking big.
Yeah.
They're thinking small little tests because it's within the realm of not really challenging yourself to think too much. And then when you get a result that is just about the same statistically, which we'll have to talk about as well.
That's right.
But they get a result that really isn't much different. And if they know anything, they're going to realize, I didn't learn anything here. It's based, and so they get discouraged. But we're saying, go big or go home kind of thing on testing.
Right. You put it this way: when you're done with the test, you're going to have a winner, whether it's a fraction or a big amount. The thing is, how much will that make a difference to the business? But the one thing we do want to reinforce is keep doing that testing. That is it's kind of low effort, and it sometimes you find some big wins there. So you always want those kind of testing.
Sure.
What we don't want to do is feel that is those are stepping stones, and we're trying to get people to think of all the other things they can be testing.
So so when you think big, what is the thing I should be thinking? Like marketing, what is market testing really?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's even set it up and kind of map it out in kind of a plain language way, right? Sure. But still to what it means. So it is, it falls under an experimental design. So in other words, you need to say, we have 2 different executions or 2 different situations we're putting out there in the market. One, and there's only one difference between the 2 of these.
Right.
So, and let's run down some of these, the more common scenarios. So if I want to know what the impact of one additional touch point in an integrated campaign, I can basically try that campaign with and without, right? So
Sure.
I have all these touch points. In fact, almost anytime I want to touch a tactic, I don't want to turn off all marketing. That's not my test. My test is, I would call it business as usual, right? So if we want to test the lift of an invite to a white paper or an invite to a webinar, because that might be an invitation type thing, the most controlled environment that you could have is where we put where we're going direct. So some people get the invitation and some people don't. And we take that population, and we say, well, these people are all the same. So if we randomly go to half, or we randomly go to a sample, depending on how much we want to put out there, then I have two groups to compare to, and I'll see the results. And let me just run through a few scenarios, and I'll come back to kind of what we're looking for.
Yeah.
But the same thing could be if I want to test. There's a group I'm working with now where it's a little bit more sophisticated, and they want to test kind of a predictive technology. So you take these two pools or you take your pool of people that you could go to, you pull off a group and say, you know what, instead of going to all of them, we're going to use this predictive technology. We're only going to go to a portion.
Right.
And our belief is that by targeting, and what we'll do is we'll put different offers out to different people, right? So we take that group and we treat them differently, and it's strategic. It's this idea of can we justify the cost of these predictive models? So the other group will get, a different promotion, and you'll be engaging them, and you'll be selling to them, and they'll get kind of campaigns, right? And that group, they'll get multiple offers.
Yeah.
This other group, some people will get some campaigns, and some will get different campaigns, and some will get no campaigns. And even those people that get no campaigns, they're going to end up buying stuff and doing all that because it's not an isolated world. They have a need, they have a relationship with a company. So at the end, you take the collective results of that one group versus the other. At the end of the day, what was the difference between the two? Now,
right.
From the ROI standpoint, we're clearly most interested in, did we sell more to one group or the other?
Totally.
But this is where the market testing methodology has an advantage over every other type of measurement methodology. And that is, I have two groups that were treated differently, whether it was a one touch point or whether it was 3 months of different marketing or even longer.
Totally.
And I could actually look at the full funnel. This is why I say it's the most strategic measurement we have. So let's say that I sold more, but I also worked my way back, and I say, what happened was I had more engagement in these types of activities. Right. So in other words, I'm looking at the buyer behavior. I could, if I had the resources, I could go out and do branding comparisons.
Right.
Which is especially important if we're doing something different on messaging, right? Mm-hmm. So if messaging is changing. So now I learn everything about the journey of what changed, what didn't. And then let's even say I look at my purchases. I could also look post-purchase to see, did they buy at a higher level? Was there more retention afterwards?
Yep.
When we do measurements and market testing on content, sometimes that content, someone walks in and they buy and they're way more educated. So even if total sales were the same, they come in and again, the things I would look for there is, did they buy more? Did they buy at a higher level because they were more educated on the product? And did they get more benefit of after the fact? The fact that they were educated, they knew how to use, let's say if it was technology, they go in using it more, they're sticky, where this other group bought because they were getting the sales pitch, they didn't get the content,
right.
they bought,
push.
Yeah, but they closed the deal, but then maybe that group's different. So
it could churn maybe sooner.
Yes, exactly.
Looking at that full picture might make sense.
So two groups treated differently.
Okay.
And whatever treatment we put onto one group, that's what we measured. So in this one case, I might be looking at all these different, this predictive methodology and the touch points, and I just look at that collectively and say this was a better strategy.
So is that if you were to boil it down into its bare essence, make some bone broth, if you will?
Yeah.
Would it be two groups treated differently? It's like a measurement methodology.
Yes,
Is that what I'm
yes.
picking up?
You-
Okay.
right. Your control group is basically getting the types of activities that you would do anyway, right?
Any-
And the test group's getting, and actually the same methodology, why it's called experimental design, happens in the medical world, right? That idea, everyone's heard that idea that someone gets a placebo pill.
Right.
Well, because if you didn't, then if you took, when they did this in the past, the scientists, they would say, well, some people are getting treated and some people are not getting treated. Well,
Right.
the act of taking a pill actually, that's why there's a placebo. People think they're getting medicated. If their mindset changes and if their actual physical conditions change, then the placebo actually has a little bit of effect, but the medicine in the pill is what they're trying to measure, not the act of taking it. So they control the experiment. I think another way people might think about it from just their own personal use is, if you're experimenting with a recipe, cooking, I always say, is a lot like marketing because you put so many things into the mix, but you don't know what makes it great. So how would you, is it the flour, or is it the spices, or is it what went into there? How long you cooked it? What temperature you cooked it? So how else would you compare it? Well, then you would try it, and then you would try it again with one thing changed. If you changed 5 things, at the end of that, you still wouldn't know what made it better. So So this idea of this comparison and being clear on what's the difference between those two groups, because that's what you're measuring.
It's interesting you bring the placebo effect in because it's so interesting. It's proven, it happens, and maybe not so much in marketing.
Right.
Maybe. Here's a pill. It's going to make you better at marketing.
Right. Yeah. I know.
All it is a Skittle, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I'm a super marketer now. But I've also heard that the placebo effect, it still works even if you know it's a placebo.
That's interesting too. I know.
Yeah.
There's something there.
They go, here's a placebo.
Right.
Now, of course, they're doing that. They're doing, talking about here, they're doing this experimental design. They're telling one group they have a placebo. They're not telling the other group they have a placebo. And they're and they're finding the people, even though they know it's not real, they're like, but it's not real, but I just feel better.
That's right. That's wild. Now, let's do one other thing, which again is something that's similar to market testing, but just to point out the difference. So let's say, and sometimes this is what we have to live with as marketers, right? Because a control group means you have to be able to withhold something. So in a direct marketing world, you could split your sample and you could control who sees it. In a mass media world, a lot of people have to use either geographic markets, or at least in the digital space, there's tracking in place. So if someone was presented with an online ad, you know who they are, different than people who were not exposed, right? So you can control this. But this idea of, so some people, what they try to, and it's still good, but it's not the same thing, is if I try some marketing today, and then next month I try different marketing, and then the next month I try different marketing, we don't really have the control group. What we're comparing it to is the last time around, but what happens is too many conditions change. So you're trying to run things at the same time as the ideal. And so what happens is, because the theory is everything that the competition would do is happening to both groups. If there's an economic thing, or even, believe it or not, weather conditions can skew a test results because people just change their mindset, or it's nice out, they're not buying, they're outside. It's raining, they don't go to retail outlets. There's things that happen that you want to be conscious of. So this idea of if it's not the same time, you run the risk that you're not comparing the exact same thing, that the conditions of this month is not the same as conditions of next month. So we have to be conscious of that. The same thing could happen if you're running ads and or doing certain events in San Francisco but not in New York. There's a risk that they're not the same. So generally, if you do some geographic measures, I would select multiple cities, and so that you take away that idea that something happened in one area, not in the other. And the other thing is, I would use whatever data I had to say, look, did they all have the same run rate? Did they the sales or whatever we're trying to measure as outcomes, did they tend to spike and dip consistently? So if I see that, and I know that these 3 markets versus these 3 markets tend to trend the same, then I've got my testing control. I can't have my results be some random occurrence. That's what we're trying to do.
Interesting. It sounds like with the timing, it it can be a hazard to, I guess, to do them individually over time, because to your point, something may change,
Yes.
the whole economy could have changed. You don't really know. So it's like, do it here at this one time, like a snapshot. But it sounds like it's a little different with the geographies. I was thinking, okay, that's also a hazard.
Yeah.
So just stick to LA County. But then you brought up a good point, which is, well, they may be crazy there.
Yeah.
And also something may happen there. And so
That's
have
right.
multiple geos so that
Yeah.
you can kind of spread load with any kind of effect that might have.
Right, right. And look, depending on the size of your business, not every market test is going to have ideal conditions. And so
Sure.
our goal, well, we have a couple different ways to look at this, but our goal is, if I measure this, can I replicate it? And that's especially important if, here's a good market test that, again, I'll think about over the years, the ones that were kind of interesting. But there was a point after, in that Great Recession, when everyone's budget got cut in half or whatever, there was some groups that said, not only they cut the marketing back so much that I'm really not having any impact, and they also were trying to make the case that this may be the time to invest in the marketing because there's a lag in the sales process.
Right.
Why don't we engage people in the content and the beginning part of the journey and assume that budgets might be back next year? So some of this, in those situations, what some of the people I was working with, as we talked it through, their plan with the market test was, I will take a portion of my budget and I will take a geographic area, a couple markets in Texas, and I will spend at double the rate of everywhere else. And if I could show that not only are results better, that they're more than double, I've made the case for more budget.
Okay.
But I've taken the risk away from the executives. The executives don't want, if they're, because they're going to be saying, hey, less revenue's coming in. Why is my marketing budget so high? What we've done is to say, look, there's an opportunity here. And so look, my point was where I was going to is you don't always have that perfect scenario. So what we're trying to say is, can we replicate this? And another thing that you look for is, can I scale it? Because, well, sometimes the market test, especially if it's strategic or if we're trying to introduce a new concept, and it'd be very risky to move all of our marketing dollars into a bucket that is the big unknown.
Yeah.
But if we could kind of test on a small scale, then we prove it out and we say, look, there's always a margin of error to consider. So when we go to scale this, to more of our markets, to national, to global, whatever we're going to do, we need to be still tracking and measuring, because it's possible when it scales, it doesn't work. So we're trying to eliminate the margin of error. But consider this. If we weren't market testing, the margin of error is way bigger because we're going into the unknown.
Right. Totally.
So we're trying to be smarter and take away some risk by doing things that, maybe don't even cost a lot and give us some feedback.
Well, to your point, we're market testing whether we're doing it or not.
That's right. Right.
We just have no idea if it's actually working relative to what could be working. And we also have no idea if one path is better than the other, but we're on a path, and
that's right.
And now we have no control and no understanding if we can replicate it, if we can scale it.
Right.
In terms of limiting the margin of error, we're just hanging out with it. We're drinking pina coladas.
Yeah.
We have no control. So might as well sort of take back some,
right.
Some modicum of control here and plan some active tests.
Right. Right. And there is, I think there's a lot to be said about that, in that when things are not working as planned, marketers have a tough time defending, right? And we hate being in that defending mode.
Right.
And we could show that, hey, we did it this way. And look, the other good point to keep in mind with market testing is, once you hold the control group, you can not only do a variation of it, you can do 3 variations or 4 variations at the same time, as long as it fits your business model, right? I mean, but in a sense, why not that you're holding business as usual? And, maybe there's not one thing you're trying to prove out. Maybe you're trying to answer, maybe it's, instead of, I have this concept, let me test it. Maybe it's, I have this problem area. I've got high churn. I've got, I can't get people to, from engagement to conversion. You pick the problem area, and then you say, here's some different ways to get to that. and we put it out there, and all of a sudden we see the needle move.
So you have this problem.
Yeah.
You want to fix it. And so, well, here's 4 things we could do
Right.
to attack
Right.
this problem. Now, I guess rather than just doing them all, you're going to selectively do them to see if some of them are working and some aren't.
No, you might do them all at the same time. But again, it depends if you have a large market with a large base of customers, and you're marketing actively, then out of, if you took 20% of that population and varied marketing, and look, you might, some of these ideas might, like, based on click-throughs or something early, they might clearly show signs that they're not working. So you can retire them and keep the winners or the top ones going to see, hey, is this really working? But there's so for your viewers, we're going to give them a good party term. So when they're out there and, you're talking about, I market test. We were looking at fractional factorial design. Fractional factorial design.
I'm not
I
sure
have a tough time remembering
your phone number, but
well, it's more about maybe you're talking to someone about job potential. So that one,
Bring it up in a job interview. That's much better. I got to wonder what kind of parties you're going to.
Yeah, I know, right? But it is one of those things. And actually, I'll tell you honestly, over the years, I've had very few times to use it. But the idea, there is ways where if you are breaking into a new market or you're really going in with a lot of unknowns, there's a way to set up a test design. And if you kind of picture in your head a grid where, let's say you're not sure of your price points, you're not sure which channels to use, you're not sure of kind of key messages because it's just that new. Yeah. There's a way to set up the experiment where you kind of, instead of testing every possible combination, you test a few combinations, and these smart guys with PhDs that we all love to have as friends can go and say, I can calculate that based on the difference between these groups and these groups, that even though there's a group we didn't test, your best solution is this price point, this channel mix, and this message.
How many of that grid do you have to do to get to that?
There's you could do it kind of a 3x3, which is 9 scenarios, but you could, I've seen, I have not done it myself, but I've seen it where you've got, maybe 8x8 or you've got all these combinations. And again, it's usually when there's a lot of money at stake and you want to learn really quickly, and there's, so it's a big business thing.
Oh, totally. But let's say you've got a grid that let's start even 3x3 grid, 9 total. About how many? And I won't hold you.
So you could, again, there's scientists that know this better than me, but maybe out of that 9x9, instead of testing all 9, you could get away with 4 or 5 variations. And it fills in the blank because it basically says, well, this is better than this going across the grid one way, and this is better than this going across the grid the other way. So the combination is likely, and you
that's
still
like Sudoku.
It is. You got to fill in that last box.
Sudoku testing right there.
Yeah. I think you've got a branding thing going on there.
Yeah, I do. Hey, nobody go out and scoop that domain.
That's right. But look, I think if we go from the interesting but not likely to use back to the reality, you could set up these 3x3 grids or even look. I think the key point is if you hold a control group, how can you manage to squeeze in 3 tests? And so, look, when you have high volumes of contacts for your marketing, it makes it very easy because statistically, you get enough response that you can compare. Right. And this is a good point. We said we kind of touch into the statistics. This might be a good point to get into it. But look, if I have a small business or if I have a huge business, but I sell, $1 billion deals that I only get 10 in a year.
Yeah, it's like.
Yeah. I mean, so if I put all this marketing in and I close 2 out of 10 deals, and I measure and I just don't have this opportunity to split my market and say, well, now I can't get 1 deal and 1 deal or 1 deal and 2 deal and feels conclusive, right? Because I'm converting, if I'm converting 2 out of 10 is 20%, next time I do this, it's probably going to be 3 out of 10 or 1, but picture that, if I'm 100 out of 1,000 or whatever it's going to be, now I kind of can say, well, chances are I'll fall in this 10% range or whatever it's going to be. And if I bump from 10% to 12%, I kind of feel comfortable with it, right?
Right.
And there's some nice tools online if you ever need to see sample size. You just look at, sample size for market tests, and there's the tools, and you plug in a few different things.
Okay.
You remember the terms confidence level, confidence interval. So if you're testing something and you are going to spend millions, you're probably going to want something like a 95% confidence level, right? And that's the idea that, hey, there's a margin of error here, and I'm willing to go with it. But if you're a medium-sized business and you measure something and say, well, this worked better than that one, and it's an 80% confidence level, well, why wouldn't you keep doing the better one? Because
good enough. Yeah.
And what I do is if I measure that and I feel that the test gave me a good enough feedback to move forward with it,
yeah,
I would then test in increments, right? So I wouldn't move 100% of my budget over, but in a sense, you're looking at validate. Okay,
right.
The test said I should do this. Let me put this out there to a larger group or do something.
Oh.
I'm tracking. I'm on track. I'm good. I keep going, right? Because you're trying to get that 20%. 80% means 4 to 5 times you're right, but you don't want to be the 1 out of 5 where you didn't work.
Right. So use the tools to get at those numbers.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what can happen? You can get numbers that you think tell you something.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't actually say anything.
Right.
I mean, how bad can that get? Can you make the wrong decision, or you just you make a decision and it's not really an answer?
To me, it's always a better informed decision, because there's a lot of people who use metrics that are directional already,
like politics.
Yeah, right. Actually, they actually are pretty good on the statistics, and they show you when they say 45% support this cause or this candidate, they tell you plus or minus 3%.
Oh, so that's a good point,
right? So they tell you, if it's 51 to 49 and it's plus or minus 3%, well, next time it might flip. But you tend to say, yeah, but chances are better that the 51 is going to do better than the 49. It's not conclusive, but 95 out of 100 times, that's going to be correct.
Well, I guess that's the slippery slope, right? If it's 51%, 49%, and your margin of error is like 5, then it could actually be the opposite, and you have no idea.
Right. But again, if you were if you were investing, and let's say it wasn't candidates, so we don't get into the politics of investing in candidates and buying a candidate.
You can't win that conversation.
No, whole different podcast. Not even.
Yeah.
But if it was, if it was that close that this marketing investment, was more likely to be, 51% chance, you're still at a 50-50. So it's but if you think about, hey, I'm likely to convert 2% of my audience to sales here versus 3%, or even 2.2%, the question is, let's say that my test on a small scale showed that I could move from 2% to 2.2. Am I going to move my full 100% of my budget over to that? I might wait a little bit longer and validate. It's going to hold off. In other words, let my sample size grow, depending on where I'm at. So because we're talking only statistics, here's a good rule of thumb that someone, one of my scientist buddies gave me, and I think it's good, is if you have a test and control and each will generate 100 responses or more, right, the outcome, not the reach, you're probably in a good shape statistically. It's not, believe me, there's situations where it's not, but when you're comparing your results and you see your lift, there's still a decent margin of error, but at least, if you're comparing 10 responses versus 12 responses, they're saying, don't trust it.
But you're saying 100 versus total responses, not the universe, but the people writing.
Right. And look, and that's if you're happy to live with good directional results and say that I've got to keep improving. Right. And for more important outcomes and budget decisions, I will look to validate. I'll move slowly. I'll make sure this is working. But if I have 100 responses for my test and 100 responses for my control, and it's showing that, hey, more of these convert to sales or other things, well, I should feel good about it.
Right.
And again, when it's really important, go online, get the statistical test, or have someone look at it closely.
Totally. I've used those before too. You go online, you plug in your numbers, and it tells you hey, here's what you got. And it's
Right.
either this is something you should keep doing, or you probably don't have enough, or it's inconclusive.
Right.
So to do the math, let's say I got a list of 1,000.
Yeah.
And if you're some baller company out there and you've got millions, just add a couple zeros, just roll
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Right.
But my math ability.
Yeah.
So if you got like 1,000
Yeah.
on that initial list, about 10% are going to respond, gives
Yeah.
you about 100 responses, hopefully
Yes.
more. Then
Right.
you're saying that's a good foothold to say, all right, let's give this thing a whirl. Let's see what you got.
Right, right. And let's say in that example, your numbers may be big on the engagement. So your margin of error and your confidence can be real high in that. And then when you go from engagement to sales, now you might be to smaller numbers.
True.
You'd like to see it flow through, but I would say unless there was a reason that I would believe that, if I had a whole new strategy that could generate high engagement and low sales, in other words, I just said, hey, come look at click through and you'll see funny pictures on kittens. I might get a real high engagement, but no one cares about my product, right? So if I'm doing something that I think it's risky, but if I just change my messaging and I think, well, more people got engaged because of that message, and I have reason to believe that they would buy at the same or a higher rate, well, I would take that as if the engagement is a high confidence and it's good, we're going with it, right? And again, I always compare that you don't want to run a test and have great statistics that are just flat out wrong. You have to do a good experiment. But we were making decisions without a test before this. We didn't know. We were taking indicators. These are better indicators.
Right.
So
it's interesting. Great takeaway for me, the idea of there being lessons along the way.
Oh yeah.
And it's not just did they click on that email or did they complete that landing page, but all the way through the end.
That's right.
Did they buy? So but doing the reverse math, you'd want to say if we want to get results along the entire path, about how many people do we need to put in the front end so that
exactly. You work it back up.
Maybe we get 500 engaging and then at least 100 buying or not buying.
Right. That's right.
That way we can have the statistical number, some confidence at each step in the process, and get a learning lesson at each point. That's really cool.
Right. So if we talk about maybe we could talk kind of pros and cons of market testing, right? Because if you compare those other measurements,
a con? What's the con?
No, there is. There's definitely
do this.
Yeah. But it's good to be aware of it, and maybe there's some limitations even to it. But let's go back in our first webinar for people that didn't see that, they go back and check it out. But we talked about the different categories of measurements, and so you have statistical modeling, right? Very advanced, but costly, and it kind of says that this touch point or whatever we're measuring resulted in this outcome, but it doesn't give you any strategy. It doesn't tell you about the buyer behavior. So that's very advanced, but very focused on the outcome, the final outcome.
And for that, you typically know it in advance, right? You have a hypothesis.
You decide, right? So let's say in most cases we're going to do modeling. We're going to go on sales. So and we look at our marketing mix, right? So that's probably the most common one. But it doesn't tell you what's wrong. In when we get to strategic market testing, we now have the benefit of statistics because we could know what our margin of error is and all that, and we set up a good experiment, good control group. So it's a valid, very valid approach. That the only thing different between this group and this group is my marketing treatment. Well, then I know what's working. But I get that diagnostic. I get that ability to look at the funnel and see why this was higher or lower, what worked, what didn't. So that's my strategic test. And then if you compare that, my only other two methodologies were either kind of a trending, a pre-post trend to say, well, and that works if you could generate a big spike because you introduce something and people got engaged or bought at a higher level. That's good, but not very statistical. And then the other one is results tracking, where we have that challenge we talked about with attribution, right? So we've got market testing. We just want to say, look, it sits on the higher end of statistics and a strong point. So let's use it smart, and but it has these other benefits of the funnel thing. But
what are the drawbacks then?
Yeah. So the limitations, the big ones. One is the one we just talked about is sample size. If you're a small business or small volume, it works against you. Look, you can get some learning, but when that margin of error gets high. But the other one is if you think about your marketing throughout the year, how often can you hold out control groups and not market to them, right? So now if you're introduce something new, so we got to put that out there, right? So if you're introducing something new into the mix, then it's no harm because business as usual is happening anyway. You're trying to prove something new. But if you're trying to measure something in the mix and you have to kind of suppress it, or you have this great idea, great new product, and you have to hold it back, you don't want to do it too often, and you can't really do it too often, right? So what I say is I kind of take this approach of look at it maybe on a quarterly basis and say, okay,
Right.
I've got this, maybe I could put an experiment out there each quarter, but that drives me back to go for the big wins. I don't want to do a subject line test if I could do something that's a little bit more strategic. Do I need another touch point? Maybe I spend more, maybe I up the offer. Maybe I do this kind of advanced modeling to see if my targeting get refined, right? So we go for that. So, and that is also one of the reasons I was saying one control group, multiple test groups, because how many times can I do that control group? So, and even
cool. One control, multiple.
Yeah. So it's the frequency. You can't use it often, but in a sense, I think you might have seen some statistics more recently, but when I was doing some measurements out there and some research, I found that about 15% of marketers were using market testing on a regular basis. And again, most of them more tactical. So it is very underutilized. And the reason I stress it as kind of the number one priority, besides, so we said strategic, but the other thing is we're not talking about a very high cost. So you may have to do some additional executions of your marketing. It may take you some effort to kind of find these markets or kind of, a little bit of analysis, make sure we have a good testing control. But at the same time, it's not like focus groups, or it's not like research where we're asking people their opinions. We are putting it in the marketplace. We are actually selling and using it. If we kept 70% of our budget in business as usual, and let's say 15 to 20% of our budget in experimenting, we're always selling out there. And if one of these hits and wins, we're eventually going to make that other 70% grow and be more profitable. And I think we talked about this in our first session too, is, the 5 to 10% of that budget could be really wild card tests, like really try a whole different strategy, really something out of the ordinary when you can. That might be once a year or something, but for the most part, let's just vary the marketing here and there. It's okay if some of it is a small variation, but we're aiming for a nice lift in the engagement that will flow through to sales.
Totally. Yeah. What I love about this is the idea that the first part you mentioned, it takes some time, takes some of your time.
Yeah.
But it's not a cost. It's not a huge cost. It's more of a time cost. So if you don't have as much money, this is a great thing you can be using, or not as much money, whether it's not budgeted or you just don't have it. So it's something approachable for everyone. And the cool thing is it's not a focus group like you're saying. It's active. You're actively selling.
It's real behaviors too, right? So in other words, it's not, would you be more interested in this or this? It's, hey, I saw this ad or this ad and I clicked through, or I got to this, I read this content, I read that content. I actually acted afterwards, right? So it's people, it's a real situation. And, even if your experiment is maybe 10% below what it would have been, as long as it's not the bulk of your budget. And again, you really only have to win, maybe 1 out of 5 times, and that win will pay back everything you might have lost on the other experiments, right? Because you're moving performance up a level.
I was thinking as you're talking about one control group, multiple test groups. It makes sense. You can't do this all the time. It's like sequestering a jury, right?
Yeah, right. Don't let them hear anything because it'll swing them and bias them and stuff.
It'll mess it up. Yeah. So, with that, with the idea of planning, you get lessons along the way if you plan ahead to have enough numbers at each step in the journey. And then also knowing that you have the frequency issues, you can't sequester everyone all the time. And I keep pointing to planning. So how do you plan? Do you have any sort of strategies of how you plan these in advance?
Yeah. So that's good. In fact, if I think one of the things we wanted to touch on is how do you get started? Where do you go with this? And what's interesting is I would put, obviously planning always starts at the beginning, but take it from the perspective of measurement planning. And instead of saying, here's my tactic, here's my campaign, how do I measure it? I would say at least once a year, similar to what you do in market testing, right? When you go out and plan the campaigns, who do we reach, all that stuff. Start with the question of what's the most important information I could find out? What could I learn? In other words, in terms of, my scope is marketing effectiveness, right? We have all these touch points, we have all these things that happen. And I would start with, what do I need to know? The other area in the planning I would ask is, where are my problem areas? Because performance areas, so we talked about that along this part where we said, we start with the problem and work our way back to the tactic and the touch point in the campaign. Right. So if I have a conversion problem in one stage of the funnel, or if I just think I could do better,
sure,
then I say I could work my way back to what are the ideas for that. So anytime we're bringing new ideas, that also falls in the plan for market test. Which one are worth testing? And I would then work back to how much does it cost and which ones are the higher priorities. So now, in a sense, I have the list of things I want to test. I want to get some good measurements and insight on. Now I have to get into that implementation in that, probably the toughest thing out of this whole thing is, how do I get a good control group? How do I get it so that I have that point of comparison? And the ideal is where I have a large pool and I could go to a portion of it, whether it's a split test because of the size or whether it's just a small sample of them. And it does take some work. But in fact, out of all the places it could go wrong, it would be the control group. So you have to ask yourself, would I expect these two groups to perform the same if I didn't do the marketing? And why you ask that is probably the biggest mistake where people think they're market testing is, let's say you're doing some marketing and you know who's buying and who's not, and some people tend to compare the responders versus the non-responders. So these people responded and they read my white paper. Later on, they buy more than people who didn't buy the white paper. But it's not a fair experiment, right? Because everyone was offered the white paper. So the people more likely to buy, of course, were more interested in the white paper. Whereas my test group, I should say, some people were offered the white paper. There was a portion responded and a portion who didn't. And then there's another group that were not offered the white paper. So do you see that difference? It's subtle, but non-responders include the people who don't care about you, didn't even read the offer, didn't. They were different. You wouldn't expect them to buy, even if whether they read your white paper or not, right? So,
you need that,
so they're not the same. Yeah. It's a bias that gets built in. And look, there are some times where you don't get that perfect control group. Events are hard to measure that way, but sometimes, there are statistical people that can look at behaviors before the event and say, all right, well, the event was held in San Francisco, so obviously we draw more people from that area. Let's look at people who kind of were invited to this, and then there's some people who we think performed similarly, and we did the statistics to try to say it's a simulated control, right? They weren't, anyone in the whole US or the whole world could go to the event, but we found the patterns and behaviors that were similar, and we did our best to kind of say that in the absence of the event, we would expect these two to continue the same purchasing behavior. One group had the event, one group did.
Interesting. So it's a good reminder to put emphasis on, if anything could go wrong, it would be the control group.
Yes.
And really beforehand, figuring out, what's the best learning I could get from this? What do I need to know? What do I want to know? What's the top thing I'd love to learn?
Right.
Problem areas, performance areas, sort of writing that out in advance.
Where's my big wins? How could if someone said, come in and increase revenue, or again, even if you have to work with, increase leads by 10%, 20%, let's even say 20%. You'd have to sit there and go, what would I do different in my marketing? And then, what experiment would help me figure that out? And sometimes you say it's one more touch point. Sometimes you say, we'd have to spend more on content. And other times it might be, we would approach the market all different. We would go, we would do something with the sales team or something really big and different. Then you say, can I do this on a small scale?
Right.
Now then kind of continuing on, you get the good control group and you put it out there. Now you're, everything I could learn about one group versus the other, right? That idea of looking across the funnel is a good practice.
Yep.
And then let's say we get the results and we make the decision. The last piece in that process is, depending on your risk, but can I validate it? Can I put this out there now on a larger scale to everyone and get the same results? If I don't, then I might come back and say, was there a problem with the control group? Could something have been biased? Or, I mean, look, it's a world that's constantly changing. So if you had not done the market test, your results from this month to next month or the next month could change.
Right.
When you get the market test and roll it out, sometimes things change. So I still think you can't really lose if you put an effort into this, because you're always a bit more knowledgeable than you would have been.
Right.
Even if every market test isn't at 100% conclusive, you're still better off than if you had done no testing and no measurement.
And I suppose you might have some preconceived notion, or you might have this thought that two different values or one's more important than the other, and if it comes back inconclusive or they're both kind of net neutral, then that's probably not the main lever that's
right.
People are looking at. So maybe that told you that there's a third option, or you're not even thinking.
Good point. Yeah, right. Maybe you were stuck and you were saying our messaging is off. You change the messaging, nothing changes. Well, maybe it's the channel. Maybe you're reaching that wrong audience. Maybe there's something else there, and it kind of forces you to step back. You're right. A market test that shows no difference is still learning.
Yes,
because you thought there was a difference, and it came back and there was no difference. So
I really like that. A market test that shows no difference is
still learning.
Still learning.
It's still an insight that way, right? You're good at drawing those out.
That's going on Twitter.
All right. Yeah. Good. But it is good. It really, you took the steps.
Yeah. And you're taking control, and you're taking control over the test you're in right now.
Right.
People say, "Hey, are we in a simulation right now?" Not sure, but I do know that you're in a test right now.
Yeah, that's right.
With no control group, you're just rolling.
That's right. There's right. Every result you get back, there's some uncertainty as to why that might have happened or what would have happened if you did something different. Really when I was there was a while where my business was focused heavily on early stage ventures.
Sure.
And people would get funded and they put all their money into this great, brand positioning, this launch and everything like that. And some companies made it and some didn't. I mean, talk about experiments.
Yeah.
You're betting the farm on one thing. So one of the things we would do was it was really hedging, because you're going into a complete unknown.
Right.
But it was, I remember with one company, the way we mapped it out was kind of 6 different strategies, in a sense, that were going out there simultaneously, skewed toward the one that was their base plan.
Right.
And then very quickly, within 3 months, 2 dropped off. You're down to 4. 1 was clearly edging up, so some more money funded into that, and then you kind of let it run until the final 2 battled it out. At the end of this, you want a winner that is not just driving engagement, hopefully funnel flow after that. So we didn't want to cut anything off too quickly, right? But we had some early indicators that, look, these are just not resonating. So let's kind of move on. And how, who wouldn't want to hedge your bet?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
This sounds like a perfect use for the party trick here, the fractional factorial design.
Nice.
Would that work for startups? It seems like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
There's no question that. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Especially because think about it, where a lot of times the marketing team is out there, and you're trying these channels, these touch points, these different marketing mix.
Yeah.
And maybe the problem is in the product, in the pricing, in something that it's kind of embedded in there. And maybe it would help as an organization, especially in a startup, to know that that's not your big barrier.
Right.
And keep it on a small scale so that you have that ability, that flexibility, kind of, adjust and still roll out and scale.
That's really cool. I could see that being a huge topic for startups, you only have so much money of someone else's money. How can
Right.
you test 5 of the 9 things and really get a more
Yes.
picture?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Anytime you're breaking into new markets, yeah, exactly. Right. But if you need, let's put it this way, if you need accelerated learning, you move to market test, multiple market tests, fractional factorial design, because get all the answers up front and move in. And that, when there's a lot at stake, that's what you'd rather do. It's that fail fast concept, that a lot of executives
Yep.
embrace. It's, I want you to learn, but I want you to know quickly what's not working. Well,
Yeah.
if you're doing one at a time in line, how long is that going to take before you try everything you possibly can and say, well, sooner or later we're going to hit something that works.
Yeah, you might run out of money on the way in
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
exactly.
Jeez.
So some good lessons and just good business practices, and even small businesses, I think, may have some room. Again, you're mostly limited if your population. If you're in one small city and have a couple hundred potential clients, it's kind of hard to split that. But you still might be able to do stuff with your digital media or something that again, instead of changing a subject line, look for just bigger differences. Does it help to lead with price or features, and this feature or this feature, and just get those. You
Right.
get some early indicators at least, right? You follow the principles even if you're not pushing heavy on the statistics.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, this is cool, man.
Yeah.
Now, have you been just busy running around the country helping people out with these things, or
Oh, always,
how's
always.
business? It sounds like it'd be in high demand.
Yeah, it never ends. And I don't know, there was, for some reason on the CMO surveys they do annually, right? These different companies do. One of the ones that came out, I don't remember who authored it, actually put out that, marketing ROI, marketing effectiveness is moving back up to the top of the list. Now, the interesting thing is, as long as I've been around and doing marketing ROI, so let's say 15, 20 years out of the business has been in business 21 years, it's always been in the top 3 to 5, right? What executive, what senior person doesn't want to know ROI? For some
100%.
reason, it's moving back up. It could be, I don't know. It could be maybe some economic factors, maybe just always that pressure on budget. But a bunch of us in this business kind of bounced that around. And I was sitting there going, but the marketing ROI adoption always is, it's never fully mainstream, and partly because it takes a lot of piece parts, but I think mostly because it's a cultural change. So I would say companies always improve, and once they improve, they stick with it. But what I find is there's always that champion in there that goes, you know what? This is competitive advantage.
Right.
This is, we know how to spend smarter. We all have this, as a group, we're sitting here in marketing and we might be doing everything right, but all of us have a hunch that the results can go up, and we can get smarter, we get better. Yeah. They're the ones that kind of come in. We come in, bang out a process, bang out a measurement, and then try to find something that sticks and lasts. So organizationally, there's just a whole different change, right?
Huh. That is cool, man. That is
So,
really cool. Hey,
yeah.
How about some shout outs? What are some places people can go to connect to you?
Oh, yeah.
Just put your book, by the way, is awesome. I've been beating it up slow and steady. For the people that love analysis and numbers, or if you just have no clue because you're just super creative, it's called Marketing ROI. It's like named the thing.
Yeah.
To your point, a lot of people aren't doing it. Most people we encounter aren't, but they all know that they want it, and it probably is those purse strings or economic factors just saying, look, I got to know where this money is going.
Yep.
And the technology is there.
I know. We have so much more data than we had when I even when I wrote the book. So I would say the book is a good resource for getting that financial, getting the financials accurate and knowing how to use this data that comes from different measurements. The nice thing is there's a lot of math to it, so it doesn't change. The book hasn't really aged too much. But on my website, which is lenskold.com, Lenskold, lenskold.com, the resources section is where I like to add the new content. And that's where more into these measurement techniques. There's a couple articles there on market testing. There's some on good metrics, lead generation stuff, even the old research reports we did. A lot of the insights are still really relevant today. So that's always been my thing. I like putting out the content. I like talking about this. I do a marketing ROI workshop at least once a year with the American Marketing Association. That's in September, toward the end of September in Chicago.
Oh, cool.
So that's a good 2-day course. 15, 20 people together, and it lets me really, there's enough time for some one-on-one attention there too.
Do I need to bring my TI-83 calculator or?
Oh, that always helps.
Yeah.
Boy, I haven't heard that in a while. No, it's a lot of it is about how to, process change even, and applying these principles, and just, if you get the basic financials, and I'm talking basic spreadsheets.
Yeah.
If you get some basic numbers in place and just start trying to communicate to say, look, if we spend more, if we spend differently, we can impact this buyer behavior, and there's upside potential. That dialogue changes. I mean, talk about respect from for marketing from outside, from CFOs.
Yeah.
It goes far. And then, getting into these measurement techniques, and a lot of it is, every company has a different challenge, whether it's data, whether it's the business model I have, and that's where we try to talk it through. Just kind of say, look, we get some small wins, people buy into it, then they'll support us. They'll fund the measurements, and so we try to break it down. And it's always keeping it strategic, right? At the end of this, it's not about the math; it's about buyer behavior. And this, when we look at full funnel, and we can say that an impact here will flow through and make an impact here, it's good stuff. You try to take a complex environment and isolate a few things that then make it less complex.
Yeah, it's all about isolating those things. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So, Chicago, are you going to get some sailing in while you're out there?
You and I were chatting. So my big sailing trip is in Michigan every year, and it's on but it's in one of the Great Lakes. It's in Lake Huron, and it's that 200-mile race that should, in most years, take about 48 hours of night and day sailing. And this year, it's called the Mackinac Race, Port Huron to Mackinac Race. And so you basically race from where the Detroit River connects into Lake Huron up to the very tip, the northern tip between, there's Michigan and then there's the Upper Peninsula. It's right in there.
Sure.
Fun little island, no cars, so it's kind of this old historic thing, which you put a couple thousand, no cars, no horse-drawn carriages, bikes.
Really?
Yeah.
So everything, is it like
oh yeah. Oh, it is a great place. I mean, as a kid.
What's the town called?
So it's spelled
island?
Mackinac Island.
Mackinac.
But somehow it's called Mackinac. I don't know. But anyway, so you could picture. So this time there was slow winds in the beginning. So instead of 48 hours, it was 68 hours on the water. And we did pretty good. We came in fourth, but didn't get a flag. But anyway, you could picture this small little island where, everyone's just walking around this town. You put a couple thousand sailors in for what's usually 2 or 3 days. It's a good time. Bell's Brewery sponsors it, and Tito's is part of it. So they have this big party afterwards. It's a good time. Sailors are a fun bunch.
Oh yeah, especially if you had a nice rough trip to get there. You just
I know.
Blow off some steam when you get there. Wow, look at that.
But Chicago also has a week later. Chicago has the same race or as a race that leaves from Chicago and goes to the same point. So a lot of these boats that travel around internationally will do one race and move and do the next race a week later. So, and that one, they had rough storms and everything, really a whole different race 1 week later. So, it's just a good sport. It's you have a good time, you work hard. Yeah.
That's cool.
And it's I guess you could call a race like that like the weather. Like marketing, in that the conditions are constantly changing. It's really you against the weather in this boat, and how you play against others and how they beat the weather. There was boats that dropped out because they got stuck in the dead zone. They just didn't move for hours and hours.
Oh, geez.
And by the time they would have missed the party and everything, the whole big event. So they just bailed out. I think they drove up to the island, but we played it really well. Again, you kind of anticipate what's coming ahead and found all the good wind spots in the beginning. And then somewhere toward the end, we had a couple boats pass us. So it's a good adventure.
Yeah, no, that sounds fun. And I was just looking at it, and I Googled it. The pictures are really cute. Little carts and carriages and bicycles. And then a little news thing said apparently a man tried to swim from Mackinac Island to somewhere else.
Oh, to the mainland,
Yeah,
probably. There's ferries that go back and
by
forth.
the Coast Guard.
Oh, gosh. Well, there are heavy currents. Anytime you're passing through, like, this little bit of land squeezing all this water in between two Great Lakes, there's a current in between there. So.
Jeez, no thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Y pool.
Exactly, yeah. But it's been good fun. And you, how about you? You're having adventures this summer?
Yeah, I actually just got back from Martha's Vineyard. We have some family friends out there.
That's a great place too.
And it always sounds like when you're, the Vineyard, Obama went there. But like 90% of the island is just really nice, normal people wearing washed out shorts,
Exactly. And it has that historic feel to it as well. So similar to Mackinac Island, where it's just, it evolves, and there's these great big beach houses, but these little towns that aren't much different from years ago.
And what's fascinating, so there's a little bit of that ritzy area, but the yachts pull in, and you try to get dinner, and it's like,
oh, right.
I went on a date, and it was like $60 for one app and 2 drinks, and just, So it's crazy, but it's also a huge college,
Oh, right.
Town.
Yeah.
Bluffs. Apparently, it swells from just a couple thousand people year round, like 5,000 or 10. I'm making it up, but 10 to like 180,000.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's a seasonal,
1,000 X's, and
nice.
And they somehow deal with that. But yeah, it's really nice out there, and
that's great.
We had a chance to go, with nets with the kids and
great,
catch like spider crabs, and there are these marine scientists who were like teaching all about them and everything. So it was a cool time.
Oh wow, that's great. See, so work hard and play hard, right?
That's it, man. That's it. Yeah. This is both, though, I feel like.
I know. I agree. Yeah.
Well, hey, man, look at the clock. Like, time is just like a vorp.
Oh, yeah.
Like, time vorp. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, thanks for coming on here again. But talking specifically about testing. Now, I've got so many notes here that I'm going to need some time to chew on. I've just been writing them down left and right.
Oh, good.
And,
well, look, we got some good lessons drawn out during the process here. I think it fits with your theory of hardcore marketing. Absolutely. Do it right, and do it to make a difference. Like make a big impact.
Yeah. Make an impact rather than just hanging out. And
it's not this fluffy stuff that looks good and it's funny. It's actually got to work.
Good point. Yeah, good point. And whether you get a result or not, you're still learning. The only time you're not learning is if you're just not doing any of it.
That's right.
All those learning lessons are just passing you by.
Yeah. No question.
Good point. Well, cool, man. Well, and thanks again. And, and for everyone else, for everyone else listening, like these nuggets, share these nuggets with people so they can get out of that activity mindset and get some tests going and even get some tests going and share them on Twitter with us and let us know what you're trying out. That's a great idea. What numbers you're seeing. And we'll start a little dialogue there. All right, guys.
Have a good time.
Thanks, man. This has been the Hardcore Marketing Show. We will catch you all next time.